Protocol Mary of Scotland, underestimated in the overall history of Britain, from Mary of Israel to Mary of Scotland. I will notice here it has not been yet realized the significance of such event or the meaning of the actual history around that particular story, and therefore the size of it as well. Someone is saying pagan times, yeah, and each time we are moving away from it, not towards it. Certainly not myself, certainly not what I have been doing my entire life, despising people that continue to hold to the skirt of their grandparents. Although some of the people cannot be accused for that, but certainly you're not going to give them the leadership position either. And of course, I'm taking history with me because I'm growing out of it, because we endure in the same time. It is as it is. Us walking to the times, and how otherwise I'm going to explain why we are different, you and me. That is going to explain why I'm here wasting my time on this, and there you are wasting your time on whatever. And you don't tell me what people and cultures can do of people of my kind. I can only imagine. That's not my point here. My point is that among us there is still hierarchy, as it was in previous times. I'm saying here properly, as the words are going on, and so is history walking, and we endure through that history. It was possible to make from my descendants what you have been making. Was it that easy with me? Why is not that easy with me? Because any shipyard does have its shepherd on some absolute levels. That is the history of which I am talking about. That is the history out of which we are growing and the history on which we endure. And in that context, I am saying here, I'm going to notice that character of Mary, which does not start with Mary of Scotland, but starts with Mary of Israel, and it is actually about the notion of Ark of Covenant that we need to talk about today in terms of its actual meaning. The entire story as it goes would have been stolen from Israel or in agreement with Israel by crusaders and brought into Scotland. We are talking about some mega-scale reference and mega-scale legend which all of a sudden disappears into nowhere. Very little attention being paid to the actual identity, although Ark of Covenant itself is reference to Covey, in the best translation nailing, as when you are engraving something with higher intensity. So it is in reference to higher intensity and higher effect of performance. We talk here about personal characteristics. We talk about Queen herself, and ultimately about bloodline of specific of what at some point even Napoleon emerges of specific make. So what I'm saying here is that history of Britain does not reflect that history of Scotland, does not reflect directly on the character and the actual dimension and persona of Mary of Israel, which by the way continues to be rather legend than real story. But we certainly notice here another megastar emerging there, that is Elizabeth of England, and of course the straightforward question would be how we connect the two. That is Elizabeth of England with the size of what we are talking about here, that is Mary of Israel. I'm associating here with directly bringing something that would be similar in nature to 10 Commandments of Moses. First of all, Moses very much decodes into Moses, bringing in question overwhelming presence of English aristocracy on rewriting the entire ancient history, question that on its own will need to be brought to daylight. We talk about imperial queen here, and that is exactly what I'm talking about here. That is the bloodline itself. Either it is the flame in Yugoslavia, it is about the flame in Yugoslavia. They were talking still about flame, which is a reference to ancient setting, of course, there. Reference to ancient bloodlines going initially in Scotland, and then in process we have reference or emergence of Elizabeth of England. They're focusing here now on the story of Mary. So would it not be that we talk and focusing on the symbols here, we notice here the symbol of flame in Yugoslavia, we talk about bloodline that is passing, is moving somewhere, there becomes a regional story. And then disappears in Scotland. So would it not be that we talk in personification of Elizabeth here, which is completely different identity, where also we certainly talk about two different events here. The identity itself versus how much of cloud the system creates around that chosen person. As here today I'm bringing this work and I still don't have any kind of coverage. I don't have these wings, while there are other people that are having absolutely no problem to get bigger wings than they can think, which is absolutely unrealistic event, completely fabrication. So I'm going to notice, therefore, we also have here such phenomenon of being re-engineered the entire identity from Mary of Israel into Elizabeth of England, and which is from active function to completely passive event. Engineered into another identity, which is Elizabeth, leaving the population here in the dark, the one that defines by Mary versus the one that defines by Elizabeth, which is getting accreditation on the account of the one that are being discredited in historic terms, but in initial momentum, here is the phenomenon of Mary of Israel, and why someone would rewrite the name here if it is not by someone who would be minding the identity. Would therefore also be a story of marriage. It would be a story of making kids. So that is why marriage sounds like Mary. We talk here about different properties, not physical differences, but on basis of capacity. And that is what my entire work is about. Because if it was only about how we look, we wouldn't be in the same room. We are in the same room because it is nothing here about how we look only. So on that ground, therefore, of course, I will need to bring this conversation forward because it affects to what humanity is going to sink into if we do not stop here and recapitulate. So the recapitulation will need to reach the higher questions as well, and that is the question of principal temple houses, how you relate to principal temple houses, which here we derive today in terms of function of the human protocol, as is character, integrity, capacity, frequency of concentration of energy. One would say it would be Big Bang itself. It would be about everything that matters versus everything that does not matter. As it turned to be here in this case scenario, me writing the book turned to be that I need to write a book on everything that matters versus everything that cannot matter. That is how important it is that we recognize here the principal temple houses, principal temple property houses, and everything, properties houses, and everything. The entire capitulation will territories actually would be in relation to how territories relate versus principal impact territories. Impact here does not mean stone falling from the sky. It rather means human growing from the earth. As realized today, the energy first of all fall on earth and then we emerge out of that earth. So nothing here falls from the sky. We emerge from the earth as so every other human. And so no one can be discriminated here under category of accidental side event. I'm talking here about profound compliance with most principal foundations on which our entire civilization has been emerging and founded. I'm not talking about some accidental adventure event here and someone accidentally falling without any kind of relevance, messing around something on some local grounds. No, I'm talking about fundamental event here, about I'm talking about foundations on which we build civilization. I'm talking about that kind of calibration. I'm talking about that kind of sensitivity here, that kind of presence. We are talking planetary identity. On such ground, I will notice here history absolute. If something emerged on certain territories, that is a matter of fact, become to be memorized and notified within certain territorial parameters. What is the meaning of such events depend on what is the actual dimension of these parameters. No one is talking that much about it. It is always something being on the secrecy hidden here. Now that we talked today about recalibration of our civilization, that is something that we cannot avoid talking about. In contrary, it becomes critical point on which everything else depends when we talk especially about recalibration or recapitulation of our historic heritage accounts, and that is why I'm here deriving protocol monarchy of earth. Or don't bother talking about monarchy because of how this work happened to sound and how this work happened to talk. So here we are talking about territorial cultural recapitulation. We are talking about the actual dimension of actual temple houses as well as something that is more absolute, not because of emerging of some kind of cloning event, but because of how the entire bloodlines and the entire population has been building up. We talk here about bloodlines of humanity, where villages have been initially, as it in the Bible explained, emerging out of one family, out of one brother, it becomes tribe. What happens after a few hundred years? What after millennium? It is going to be a nation, a state at one point. So we are talking about bloodlines basically, not about cloning. When I'm talking about principal imperial temple house, and then what I'm getting when I go in Scotland, and what it means when I go in Scotland with this work. That I would not feel as giving present to Catherine Zeta-Jones and as asking England, neither framed or conditioned by it, and as asking England, what on earth you think you're doing here, sharing the world maybe, based on what account? Now this is political discussion, as it is quite mega approach, because it does not have a perspective, does have as perspective planetary events. I'm not going to zoom further than state level, because any private individuals anyway would exist on parameters of state platform. I will also remind politicians that they are not giving vow each time to nothing and about nothing, but that is a given point of time, that at a given point of time represent in personification of the state and would be liable to answer questions on behalf of the state when it happens that the state appears as a legal subject in certain conversation. Also, we are not going to bring the size of this litigation in substance of few $1,000,000, changing the owner account in exchange between presidents and various business communities. This is historic heritage relating work, and bringing too much of noise would sound as avoiding to bring the attention required levels. I'm not going to say that these are not important problems. I'm going to say if president is making much bigger noise than the state litigation account, then something here is not covered properly. That means dysfunctional president, which instantly would need to resign, so we don't have available we don't have available president to actually play neutral and be available to represent the state itself. As you can notice, when in question, for example, China or Japan, the attention goes directly on the actual event. I will notice also here that we have profound reference to red in Serbia, and Mary is quite red. She is Red Queen. Here, red is not exactly reference to red color, it is red identity, and I will recognize that in this case scenario we talk about a reference to China and Japan. We talk here about influences from China and Japan, and from there I'm going to project there would be red element in Israel as well, because these were the same tribes moving around in given historic times with the entire line of emperors around. And then we get all of the sudden Red Mary or Rosemary. It gets more blunt than the entire history can either allow or afford to be ignored. Yet notice again, I'm still here making reference to more distant line of China and Japan. When it comes to principal temple houses, there should not be that much confusion, neither it should be that easy for people to amend temple overnight, especially when it is in question millenniums of cultural setting, and neither cultures themselves should be receptive that much into amending theirs or the original temple houses, because on such temple houses depends the entire cultural identity as information above all, because we talk about certain properties here, about functioning on certain very specific parameters, that is specific set of personal features, as after all that is what is worth that much of marking and spreading legends. At this point, everything might look like graphic design just because I'm using temples in temples in the way how everyone was using them for 2 millenniums. Well, they were actually joking about it, and I am serious about it, and now I am all of this, and now all of the sudden this is graphic design. If such stories can exist in the past, why they cannot exist in the present? Because someone can make 10 commandments at ground zero in Israel and from the hill of Sinai, but someone cannot make 10 commandments or more or less today? I mean, why all of a sudden is graphic design? Just because you have actual persons speaking about actual religious event in more meaningful way, but no one is going to call that historic event in the same time? But I'm introducing here also that there is a strong influence of Far East countries into that character rather than of Africa. There is overwhelming belief that main reason why the entire bloodline of Jesus has been discriminated is because of Africa. I found the real answer is because we talk about influences of Far East countries, which have been found clearly as harder to compete with, so they have continued to be the main reason of that level of resistance, being a reason why someone is still finding these territories on the way of how they deploy themselves and would find them even dangerous from that perspective, in the fear that they can take over, although civilizations do not deploy exactly like that. It primarily becomes a question of value systems and what would be driving the civilization. It would be much more dangerous for everyone that we build civilization on wrong drivers and we end up as antipode of civilization rather than building of civilization, where being competent is in substance what entire concept of being human is about. I also don't like how fast someone wants to drive now Far East countries into next stage of this kind of digitalization. And that is like someone is saying that that equation of being human is open on the other side. I wouldn't agree to the extent that any kind of formation does not exist in such mode, but it is basically locked within the formation of the planet and formation of this realm. We still talk about protocol human here, defined within the dimension of life on this planet, within well recognizable principal features and principal function of the protocol itself, rather than assuming that we have some open side of that equation where we can go out from the given form itself and then talk about human still. Of course, that is where you're going to lose human because we talk about something very specific here and what is okay to be, what is not okay to accept. But it also means that we already have formation that is already something that exists in the format of this realm, and this realm does not have on one side a tail that is dispersing into outer universe. Neither our human should look like that. So how far our protocol human really should look like that? Like we are dispersing into outer universe, well rather we are trying to constantly deliver ourselves within more successful platform on the boundaries on which we recognize human dimension existing. While we still talk about standards of accomplishment, here rather than end line of not having end line. Here, rather than not having boundaries, we talk about standards of accomplishment. The protocol that already does have its contours and does have its form, it's critical important, and that is where all of these experiments with digitalization of the population should stop. I'm not going to buy your extraterrestrial robotics that does have a bone system, and does have a body, does have heart and does have blood vessels, but then it is robotics. And then they have also very silky skin. Has anyone tried to describe the skin of some of humans being as well? The skin of human would be also silky and smooth, and as such noticed with very much in Middle East to the point of worshipping. Should we not notice it here in relation to what, by the way, we talk about smooth skin of human? I mean, if you refer to extraterrestrial, very smooth skin, are you going to say that human is not having smooth skin? In comparison to what we are talking about smooth skin of extraterrestrials? Anyway, a part of so-called extraterrestrials. Anyway, a part of allowing some space for genetic mutation to happen over the long history of living on this planet, I would rather notice the most comprehensive genetic engineering of the human dimension by the human itself, and that madness should stop once forever before someone to start talking about some extraterrestrial in more serious manner. We have managed to identify what's going on here, enormous degree of re-engineering of the code of human on the planet, and it should stop immediately, where we also need to identify the centers of recovery, and that doesn't sound to me as we are going to continue for another day of doing all of the same. In substance, when it comes to the way how someone looks, there is double measurement in the value system of Western civilization. While on one side they want to deliver to the world that information that they are extremely tolerant and highly democratic, while on the other side we have now a situation where, for example, in TV show Outlander, there is promotion under flag of Scotland of very specific mega body profile, as in America, where there is nothing wrong about the character. It is very charismatic, energetic, concentrated energy. The problem is with who are the negative characters, either as homosexual or as negative characters described in that show. These are the red characters. One would say, well, this is not going to be the first movie. There was also Mad Max in 80s, slaughtering three-quarters of Australia out there. I'm going to find extreme. Yes, considering the fact who constitute Australia, unless someone wanted to bring forward certain discussion, as for example, what constitutes still the principal value system of overall Australian population, and what kind of economy dominates the value system, being mining industry, which sound as a minor. So no wonder it would emerge at some point character as it is Mel Gibson to say, excuse me, for how long you're going to walk over me as I don't matter? Am I just nothing for you to squeeze me like a tomato or something? Am I going now to serve the global supply of tomato juices or something? Have you ever managed to bring this to actual conversation? Or have you ever managed to bring this to actual conversation? Or you look at your retired economic system melting like an ice cream on the sun? All I need to do is to continue asking you to what you're going to attach your currency, or the cycle, the next cycle is going to start again. And when we talk, I'm getting a bit aggressive here. Probably I have realized how disadvanced the other side has become, and what it would take to launch recovery here. It will take solid explanation of the present situation. And when we talk about Commonwealth here, and one wanted to get serious here, you want that much of ambitious political formation, but then Africa is born on it, while you are erecting imperial flag out there. Of course, in 21st century, you want to speak democracy. It's going to be how you're going to walk your colors. Make no mistake about it. Starting as right now, as we are all watching now, the humanity is watching. Although, of course, I pretend for much higher position than the one for the sake of preventing the previous doomsday to continue in such direction, and for the sake of nothing else would fit my unemployment status, and people on this planet do not die at the age of 60 as matter of unemployment. Well, I hope so. But going in China and Japan and trying to amend it, no, thank you very much. But no, let's think other way around. Let's think that you are not that much perfect as you really want to project yourself. Let's get a bit more realistic in assessment of the planetary population today before someone is aiming to take the Earth certification and make everyone else alike. And that's one thing that is confusing here as well. When political correctness sounds as one animal species winning while the humanity clearly exists in mode of garden of different flowers, that is cultures.